Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Chiff Chat, the organ podcast with Ben Blore. Oh, that's who I am. We're over the halfway point with these now. This is episode 4 of 6. I hope you're all enjoying this little experiment, all 7 of you who are listening. It's interesting to think that these podcasts could be dug up by archaeologists in 1,000 years' time as an indicator of organ culture in the 2020s. It's just a shame then that last week's quiz with Daniel Moult was such an epic shambles. I feel I owe you lot and these cyber archaeologists an apology. But never fear, you guys are always there waiting in the wings to correct me. You might remember there was a question on which composer had an organ work as their Opus 1. I thought it was Howells with his Organ Sonata No. 1 in C minor, but then I checked my copy far too late, as it turns out, and it said Opus 2, which was, if you'll excuse my French, a real bummer. However, the good doctor Jonathan Clinch, who knows a thing or two about Howells, in fact he's writing a biography of him as we speak, he let me know that Howells' Opus 1 was the C minor sonata in a couple of his early lists, but he reordered them a few times and then gave up entirely with numbering them in the 1930s. Apparently it's marked as Opus 2 in the copy that was used for publication, but not in Howells' hand. So there you go, I'm going to count that as a minor victory, although my ego has taken a bit of a beating. A Pyrrhic victory, maybe. Another one of the questions was which organ had the most 8-foot open diapasons on it, and the answer was St. Paul's Cathedral with an answer of 8, or so I thought. Turns out I'd missed 2 on the pedal division, so the answer's actually 10. Thanks to the brilliant Richard Pinnell for that insight. What a boffin. Actually, he'd make a great guest. If you'd like to email me with a question, or more likely to pick me up on something I've got wrong, then ping one off, as they don't say, to podcast@chiffchat.com. That's podcast@chiffchat.com. Someone who didn't do that but left a YouTube comment was John, who apparently was listening so intensely to last week's episode that he missed his stop on the bus and ended up somewhere he didn't want to be, in the rain. Well, sorry about that, John, but thanks for your honesty, and I hope the reason was that you were just so engrossed in the stimulating content rather than it had just driven you to a state of mind-numbing vegetation with your eyes looking in different directions and a bit of dribble coming out of your mouth. Right, now, ladies and gentlemen, if you're all just about ready, please take your seats. We're going to move on to the actual podcast, which this week will be introduced in the form of a limerick by me. There once was a podcast called Chiff Chat, which could be enjoyed with a Kit Kat. Hosted by Blore, the content is poor. It takes a lot to admit that. What an intro. Right, okay, podcast time. Hello and welcome to the podcasty bit of the podcast. It's Chiff Chat, the organ podcast, with me, Ben Blore, and a different special guest each week. At the time of recording, it's just gone really, really cold. Last week we had sort of blazing sunshine, and now it's sort of hat and scarf weather, so I've just picked up today's guest, floating along the Thames as a giant ice cube, and I've thawed him out just in time for this recording session. It's Martin Baker! Woo!
Hello, Ben.
Hello.
It's great to be here.
It's a bit underwhelming, I'm sorry. The studio audience aren't really pulling away. Now, when you search Martin Baker on Google, the first thing that comes up is the world's leading manufacturer of ejection seats.
Yeah.
Is that a side racket, or is that someone else?
Yeah, I've known about that since I was first able to...
Oh, really? Okay, right, yeah. So it's not surprising.
But they were Mr. Martin and Mr. Baker. I think they were two people. But I love the idea of the design, that somebody can be instantly ejected from the environment in which one is.
Yeah, quite. No, as we all know, Martin Baker, the organist and the person currently in this room and in your ear holes, is an exceptionally fine player and choir trainer. He was Master of Music at Westminster Cathedral for nigh on 20 years, and now enjoys a busy freelance career that takes you all over the world.
Yeah, kind of.
So here we are doing a podcast. It's a novel concept for me. Do you listen to many podcasts?
On and off. I'm a sort of fair weather friend.
Okay, I don't. So, I mean, between us, we've got very limited experience, but I'm sure we'll muck on through. I mean, some people might say we've missed the podcast bubble by 5 to 10 years, and those people are correct. But we're quite rock and roll on Chiff Chat, so we do things after they're cool. A little behind-the-scenes magic. I don't know what order these are going out in, but this is the first one of these we've recorded, so Martin's my very glamorous assistant guinea pig. Have you ever been called that before, Martin?
Yeah, a lot okay. Of the time. Yeah.
So if you're even listening to this, it means we've barely scraped over the admittedly very low bar of quality that one would come to expect from a podcast. I think you're in a unique group all by yourself of having worked at all three big London cathedrals, St Paul's, Westminster Abbey and
Westminster Cathedral. Yeah, and the latter twice. I started there as organ scholar, so I sort of completed the circle. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there are other people who've worked in all three places, but I suppose my permanence, particularly at the cathedral, has given it a certain.
I mean, I know your roles were slightly different at each one, but you must have got to know each of the organs quite intimately, without sort of wanting to draw you out on that and say which one your favourite was. Can you tell us a bit about the instruments themselves?
Yes. Well, when I first came out of Cambridge, I was at Downing College, which was and still is, I think, considered one of the more minor musical colleges, and it certainly had one of the less impressive organs when I was there. So back in 1985, they said, "Oh, I know the organ's not very good, but we'll be having a new one soon." And I think 30 years later, I actually opened the new organ there. Okay. Anyway, so that's by way of prefacing my first interaction with the Westminster Cathedral organ. This huge 4-manual grand organ, which is really just there to be a solo instrument, and it was overwhelming. It is, as you know, overwhelming to play. Even if you're playing on foundations up there, you're probably well above the comfortable decibel limit.
My enduring memory is that great mixture to the right above your head.
Yes, that's probably the reason I have quite severe tinnitus these days.
Yeah, me too. And as for the Abbey, I mean, listeners may know I play the Abbey organ fairly regularly. I've been playing it for 7 years and I still don't really know how it works. There's all these sort of rocking tabs on the side and it's got all these mod cons and things.
Yes, it was a wonderful console. I had that was the third of the three places I went to, in fact, because I was at St Paul's in between. And maybe you want to come back to St Paul's, but I saw the Abbey in the light of St Paul's, where you're at basically a Father Willis organ, and you're sitting not very close to the pipes, and the conductor and the choir are right underneath the pipes, and that conductor was John Scott. So that was quite an intense, shall we say, environment. But because the grand organ of Westminster was something that you didn't ever use for accompanying, I kind of learnt the ropes for how to set up an organ at St Paul's. They had a system, John Scott and Andrew Lucas, which they built up over many years. And that was a very useful sort of starting point in how to handle a huge instrument. So that stood me in good stead going to the Abbey, where my main job was actually to accompany the services. And there are rocking tabs everywhere. It's changed. It's been updated over the years since I left, but it was already pretty advanced at that stage. There were 5 keyboards in total. And the most complicated thing, I think, was the use of the divisions on the screen, which spoke very clearly into where the player was, versus the divisions up in the triforium, which spoke much more clearly to the listeners on both sides.
I feel in the organ loft, you've got the best seat in the house, really. And anywhere else you go, you get different little bits of the organ kind of coming into your periphery.
My advice always was to players was to make it sound like a very spiky Kleiss upstairs, and then downstairs it would sound like a sort of wonderful Harrison. If you made it sound like Harrison upstairs, it was just unintelligible downstairs. It was just fat rumbling, and there was no clarity to what was going on.
Yeah, quite. I think I would struggle to work in St Paul's just because of the massive acoustic in there. Did you find that a problem? Or?
Yeah, well, I notice it now when I go back. I was there the other day listening to Evensong, and it takes my brain about half an hour to start to be able to process the sound meaningfully. And if one's listening to the organ there, a thing which it's my OCD, I find really off-putting, is that the chancel organ comes directly at you from the chancel, from the pipes that you can see. Mm-hmm. But as the organ builds up and it gets louder, the dome chorus comes on. It's over to your left side.
Yes.
Now, Willis's original had pipes on both sides of the dome, and I've always thought what they should do is get a dome swell and put the pipes back on both sides. But the idea of the centre of gravity of the sound moving physically as it crescendos is a bit weird. It takes me a while to get my head around that.
There we go. Right, so we're going to move on. People will know you for being an improviser.
Yep.
And indeed, you won St Albans improvisation competition back in the day. I just want to pick your brains about that. I can improvise myself fairly functionally for the liturgy, sort of plugging the gaps when I need to.
More than functionally.
I don't know.
It's amazing improvs from you.
The oratory liturgy is quite old school, and
yes.
I've got quite adept at doing a passable pastiche of vocal polyphonic music. What are the differences between a liturgical improvisation and a concert improvisation?
Well, you could actually argue that playing a concert improvisation is actually much easier than playing a liturgical improvisation. And organists in this country are thinking about improvisation initially as making nice sounds that the congregation won't find, they won't make them upset or uneasy in any way. And so you're actually trying to do something really quite complex. But I think to begin to improvise, you just have to feel comfortable making sound. And I was very difficult to teach as a child, so I always find there was a natural instinct for me to do my own thing at the keyboard alongside playing notes. And I think if you start doing it at that age, and I also love the idea of listening to other people's music and trying to recreate it myself without necessarily understanding the details. So you kind of develop your ear and brain to finger connections that way. So if you're doing a concert improvisation, I think you've got very much a blank canvas, so you can go wherever you like. And indeed, I would argue that the word improvisation actually doesn't imply, first of all, that you should be able to play in the style of Bach or de Grigny or Franck or even Pierre Cochereau in the style of another improviser. It actually means experiment with sound. And a real improvisation should be that. And yes, I find that the difficulty in a concert improvisation, particularly if it finishes the program, which it usually does, is that you've got to press a few buttons in the audience.
Yes.
You've got to round things off. You can't do something just really weird and then it just stops randomly.
Yeah.
But then if you play a concert improvisation in the middle of a program, you can do that. And I've had some of my most fun concert experiences have been doing that. And there's absolutely no pressure at all. And I find that audiences, if you were to say, here's a new piece that composed by Martin Baker, and it's, plink plonk and really weird stuff, they sort of fold their arms and kind of grimace and, wait till it was over. But if they know you're improvising, they think of it differently.
I think their ears open a bit more.
They do. They're kind of in the process with you. So I think, coming back to what you say you do here at the London Oratory, I think that's the really hard and, it's the creme de la creme bit of improvising. And if I were to advise youngsters learning to do this, I'd say just start with anything. Don't try and be anything. And only once you're comfortable at the keyboard playing nonsense, then you can start to refine things. Just like a baby trying to speak English. Initially you get in noises like that. But the point is they're trying to communicate.
Well, this was going to be one of my questions. I'm sure you get asked this all the time, your advice for people wanting to get better at improvisation. It's all well and good saying you just sit down and keep playing and see what comes out, but you surely need a background fundamental knowledge of harmony, right? As in you need to know the rules before you can break them. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think it is. And I think in my experience of trying to teach improvisation, I wouldn't say I teach it, I try to teach it. And you do find there are people tend towards one of two extremes. One is that they can sit down and play any old thing and they're very happy. And then one has to encourage a little more discernment in what's going on if they want to make progress. But at the other end of the spectrum, you get people who play a major chord very nervously and then think about changing perhaps to its dominant.
That's me. Yeah.
No, it's not. But and in those cases, I think one does need to free up a little bit. But I think what's behind this is not necessarily the technical aspect of musical language. It's all about communication. And I'm sure this is, you would agree with me that in playing any music, and the organ is a particularly difficult instrument because it's inanimate. You often can't see the audience if there is one, and the idea of actually bringing the music off the page, finding out what's not on the page that needs to be communicated, is what makes a performance successful. I wish I could do it every time. It's not easy to do, but improvisation is the same. It's a form of communication, and you can speak, as I am probably doing now, imperfect English, but still get a point across. Yeah. At the same time as thinking, well, let me try and improve my English for next time. So it's a mixture of all of these things.
And you have to practice it as well, don't you? I mean, it's one of those things. Well, not you specifically, but one must practice it.
It's a great way to get to know a new organ if you haven't played an organ before, rather than just opening your first Bach prelude and pulling out stops that you think would work. Just pull out some stops and see what they sound like. That's how I would start. And you can play any nonsense. It's just getting to feel the instrument.
I mean, I've seen you improvise, and it's a sort of sight to behold. You almost go into a trance-like state at some point. It's amazing, But when you do concert improvisations and you get themes given to you from audience members, you must have had your fair share of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and Beatles Toccata and that kind of thing. But when it's a free improvisation, how do you go about picking your themes? Do they just come to you naturally? Or?
Yes, and in fact, I think I do more of that now, because one thing that I quite enjoy doing is just picking little bits from my subconscious that have been already present in the music I played in the program itself. And there's something in my brain that will just kind of throw them out in a different order, and it gives me something to focus on. And also it gives the audience more to think about. I think you can beguile them a little bit by those. Oh, yes, I heard that earlier, and then somehow make it all come together, or not. You can start an improvisation which sounds quite formal, and then it can break apart deliberately. That's kind of fun to do. You're just throwing sound here, there, and everywhere. And I think, obviously, one has to be conscious about where it comes in the program and what you want people to feel, what message you want them to get from the music.
Yeah.
So I was just going to say about practicing improvisation. One thing I do find is that if I've practiced an improvisation before a performance, even if you don't know what the theme's going to be and you get a good feeling for it, I find that then actually quite off-putting. This is probably just peculiar to me, because when it comes to the improvisation itself, if I've done something good immediately before, I'm trying to reproduce that. So my mind's already in the past tense. And I think I prefer and feel much easier when there's just an open road in front of me and I can take any direction I want without any preconceptions. And then that makes it harder sometimes to go on to the next improvisation, which could be 2 weeks later. If something goes well, one kind of remembers what it was that you thought was good. And then I start to deliberately try and avoid doing that again. So I end up tying myself in knots.
Yeah.
And so I would say that generally let's say I do 100 improvisations, probably 2 of them will be good. And ones that I would really like to hear again, perhaps. And then, 80 of them would be okay. And, another 18 would be dire, perhaps.
So you're quite harsh on yourself. Yeah, no, I think that'll all be great. So it's a sort of controlled spontaneity, I suppose, in certain instances, you might say.
Yes, there's a lot of multitasking going on.
I just want to ask you a bit about recital programs. It's an endless fascination of mine. I love seeing people's programs and how their mind works and how they put together a program. And as you say, you include improvisations in your programs, often interspersed with scripted pieces, and as you say, you perhaps use that as a diving off point for the improvisation. I know you also include a fair bit of Bach in your programs. Do you think your tastes have changed over time at all? Maybe in terms of transcriptions or anything?
I think my tastes change daily. I have obsessions and then they change to other obsessions. For a while in the 90s, I got very tired of French music and stopped playing it. I thought I'd just play British and German music plus others. Because sometimes one feels in this country that there's a kind of default to playing French music and Bach. That's real organ music. So yes, my tastes vary a lot. And they're often inspired by what I'm listening to at the time, what other people are doing. And so sometimes I will play Bach and improvise. I love improvising on Bach. That's a fascinating thing to do. Somewhere recently, I played the E minor 5/4/8, known as the wedge fugue, and there's that sort of bizarre toccata that comes out of nowhere after the first. And I just thought that would make a good topic for an improvisation, because it's almost atonal.
Yes.
And if you take it out of its context, then you've got some amazing material to work with.
Now, in 2021, we were both in Montreal for
Yes.
the Canadian International Organ Competition, which was a lot of fun. I was a competitor and you were a judge. So I sort of only saw you here and there, and I wasn't really allowed to talk to you. And this question's really just for my own interest, to be honest. But what's it like being on an international competition jury? And what are you looking for from competitors?
Yeah, I've done a few, and they're enormous fun. First of all, you meet some very distinguished other performers who are on the jury panel. And I try in my own mind to steer clear of dogma and just listen. And do I like this performance? And if so, why? And why not? I sometimes other jurors are more, well, I would expect this in this piece, and he did, if he did X, I want X, and he did Y, that kind of thing. But then that can lead to some very interesting conversations. I think I'm right in saying Montreal was a big panel, and it was very well chaired, very well managed, and I liked everybody on it. And those kind of, off the panel moments where you end up in a hotel bar or something are really great fun, just talking about music with other people. But I think the advantage of a big panel, especially when it's done first of all with numbers, I hate things which are just done by numbers. Yeah. But if you're scoring and there's a system and the panel is large enough, you can't force anything. Sure. There is going to be a kind of overall kind of trend, even if one person sort of gives everybody a 0, apart from one person, you give them 100% or something. Right. I always like it when after the scoring you can have some kind of discussion.
Well, I was going to say, is it tricky when there are so many other judges from different disciplines and walks of life with perhaps contrary views to reach a consensus on the better players?
I suppose it is, but again, the panel there and in other places I was on the St Albans jury in 2007, and that was smaller, but again, very, very well chaired. The interesting thing I think St Albans is different now, but Montreal was not anonymous. And I think that's a very good thing, because having been a competitor at St Albans and also on the jury 10 years later, and both times they were, in quotes, anonymous, that does mean that, and I'm not thinking of anybody in particular, but it does mean it's possible for a member of the jury who actually knows, if you've got a student, you don't need to know, you will hear your own students playing, won't you? Sure. So you can potentially be biased under the guise of anonymity. So I do like it when it's out in the open, and if you are biased about your own students, it's very obvious to everybody else. And I would always declare an interest, say, I know X or I know Y, so please see my comments in the light of this. Of course,
We're going to finish off this segment with some quick-fire questions. Okay. Martin, I'm going to chuck a load of questions at you. These are the same questions every week for each guest. Right. And I'm going to silently judge your answers quite harshly. Okay, so, favourite organ?
That's a really hard one. I would always, when I was at Westminster Cathedral, I would automatically say Westminster Cathedral. I like to bat for my side. Having said that, when I was at Westminster Abbey, I probably wouldn't have said Westminster Abbey organ. But there is something in this country about the Westminster Cathedral which has this direct and supreme authority. It's the nearest you can get to the kind of French grand orgue, isn't it, I suppose? Agreed. But there are really good organs everywhere, and even though I've never played it, I think my answer at the moment is going to be the Flentrop in Duke Chapel in North Carolina. I've heard it on recordings, and I would love to have that in my living room.
Favourite organ composer?
I suppose it has to be Bach, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's fair enough. No one ever says John Stanley.
Well, I think I do. When I was at Orchestra at Westminster Cathedral, every morning prayer voluntary, you did the same, playing at 7:40 at morning prayer. I had 3 books of Stanley voluntaries, and it always used, the priest would always kind of leave with a kind of smile.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Which was nice.
Favourite performer, alive or dead?
Wolfgang Rubsam, I think, at the moment, and I've never heard him live, but I just love what he does with Bach. It's sometimes crazy. My second answer for somebody I actually do know would be Nicholas Kynaston, who I just, he used to come as often as we could get him to the grand organ series at Westminster Cathedral. And of course, it's a very different repertoire from Rubson, but the fire which came there, and with again, you never quite knew what you were going to get. And that would have me on the edge of my seat. Really loved that.
Favourite recording?
I think that would have to be Rubson's Arte Fugue from Duke Chapel in
right, there we go, yeah. Composer who never composed any organ music that you wish they had?
Beethoven. I don't think he composed any organ music, but I played one of my own transcriptions of him last night. I wish there was an actual Egmont overture. I did a couple of overtures, Coriolan and Egmont, back in the early 2000s, just to get a bit of Beethoven.
Does it work well on the organ?
I think so, but then I like playing music on the organ, even if it's not written for the organ. Bach did it. So,
quite. It's dramatic stuff. Cavicol or Harrison and Harrison?
Let's just say that I worked with a choir with a very particular sound, Westminster Cathedral Choir, a continental sound, and without wishing to libel any firm here, I would just say I would pick an organ that was closest to that sound, with the fiery reeds and so on. Does that answer your question?
What a wonderfully unrehearsed answer. Thank you. Good. Evensong or Mass?
Interesting you've asked not Evensong or Vespers. So some people do think they're the same thing, especially we used to find that at deputy auditions for lay clerks. Well, obviously you would expect me to say Mass. I am a Catholic because of the repertoire and the chant which permeates everything, which it also does at Vespers. But since leaving Westminster Cathedral, I've been to Evensong more often than I used to. And it's a very beautiful musical vehicle. And the kind of problems we would have maintaining concentration in choristers through a Mass, it's very kind of broken up, and starting an offertory motet after a 20-minute homily and a creed and intercessions. If it was a Howell Salve Regina, I'd be trying to get their attention for about 5 minutes before, remember you've got to sing this high top F. And I think once it went well. I think Evensong is a very, very beautiful vehicle for music and keeps the choir very engaged. But I think, despite that, I have to say Mass.
Yeah, fair enough. Vidor or Vienne?
Oh, haha, yeah, definitely Vidor.
Okay, we'll come on to that in a bit. All right, fair enough. Rega or Cargalet?
Definitely Rega.
Oh, dear. Right, okay. Howells or Stanford?
I'd go for Howells, actually.
I think I would too.
Would you?
Yeah.
Okay, good for you.
Bach or Messiaen?
Yeah, I'd go for Bach, definitely.
It's a tricky one, isn't it?
I would thought if you'd said Tournamere or Messiaen, I'd have gone for Tournamere as well.
Interesting, okay. And finally, socks or shoes?
Are you a sockist as well? I play in socks. There was a running joke at Westminster Abbey when I was there. I had a pair of organ shoes and they fell apart, so I bought a new pair, and there was a pedal mistake, so I apologised to the lay clerk, saying, I'm terribly sorry, I've got some new organ shoes, I've made a pedal mistake. And thereafter, if I ever played a pedal mistake, they say, have you got another new pair of organ shoes? No, I gave up shoeing in about 2013, 2014. When were you was it during your time at the cathedral? Was I a sockist then?
You were, yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I suppose you just look a bit silly going out onto the concert stage in your socks, but, it's one of those things.
Yeah, I sometimes wear Chelsea boots that you can just flip off easily. But so you can get onto the stage and take a bow. Yeah. But the hard thing then is slipping them back on afterwards and making sure you don't kind of slide downstairs and have an accident. It's happened to organists, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Some people get slightly offended by it, don't they? I can't see the point. I suppose people like their conventions, don't they? It's probably more in this country than in, let's say, continental Europe.
Yeah. You don't wear gloves when you play, do you?
Sometimes it feels as if I am, but...
Boxing gloves, yeah. Now we come to one of our regular items, which is Organ Heaven and Organ Hell. And this is where our guest waxes lyrical about a single piece or composer they really, really love. And then whatever the opposite of waxing lyrical is, waning dissonant, maybe, about a piece they can't stand. I'm going to attempt to play devil's advocate, unless I agree, in which case there won't be any tension or drama, and the item is essentially pointless. So, Martin, when you reach St. Peter at the Pearly Gates, what's going to be on 102.8 Heaven FM?
Well, obviously I could say Bach, but that will be everywhere, won't it? It won't depend on the incoming customer or person experiencing the last judgment or whatever. So I'd be saying let's have some Vidor, please.
Okay, why?
I just think one can hear the sun and the daylight in Vidor's music. It's very compelling. There are all sorts of shades of emotion. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel... I know he was a very sort of suave, probably quite sort of self-centered kind of person with his salon and everything. But I love his music, and I've played probably 70% of his symphonies. I'm 60. I play 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10. So that's 6 out of 10, isn't it?
Yeah.
And movements from 1 and 2. I've never done 4, and I want to learn 7, definitely.
Is that the A minor?
Yes, the A minor. Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind admitting I don't really get on with Vidor.
Really?
Yeah, I'm happy to sort of cherry pick movements from the symphonies, but I don't know. I find the symphonies just 2 or 3 movements too long. I don't know. I find a lot of it doesn't quite lie under the hands in the same way that it does with Vienne.
Yes.
We'll come on to Vienne in a bit, I'm sure. But
yeah.
I don't know. There's the Andante sostenuto from 9, which is beautiful. That's really nice. Mm-hmm. It's a nice movement in 4 and a meditation in 1, I think.
Yes. Is that the sort of E-flat minor movement?
That's the one, yes. I don't know. That big March Pontificale, whatever it's called, from Symphony 1, that doesn't lie under the hands at all. I think I don't know. And then is it Symphony 6 where it goes into F sharp minor? That's a real pig to do the pedaling around there.
Wonderful moment. But talking of lying under the hands, I think this is where I'm at a disadvantage. I mean, listeners can't see my hands now, but you'll see a sort of a big kind of, what would you call it, a lumberjack's palm or something, and then short, stubby fingers.
Quite imposing.
Coming off. So I can reach an octave, but if there are notes, extra notes in the octave, sometimes I can't do it. I definitely can't go any further than an octave. So in terms of having to rearrange things, I have to more or less rearrange everything that I play.
Interesting.
Yes, I envy people. I taught somebody the other day with his smallest finger, his pinky, was actually longer than my index finger.
Really?
Oh, yes. What a wonderful physique to have to be an organist.
I don't know if he had the same problem as Franck, who wrote these massive chords, and he had big hands, didn't he? So he didn't really, he didn't really think about other players when he was sort of writing. I think I'm probably a bit aggrieved as well because I've never been able to play the repeated semiquavers in the toccata. You know, dun 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 dun. Dun,
yeah,
well, I think the RSI just isn't really worth it.
Suggest perhaps it's because I've never heard you play it. Maybe I have, but perhaps it's generally played way too fast.
Well, I was going to say, have you heard Vidor?
Well, he was quite old, wasn't he? And it
fair,
sounds like he's got a limp, I think, doesn't it? Yes,
but it's quite consoling to know even he couldn't play it. You know?
Yeah, but I think it's meant to be, rather than a kind of flashy encore, it's a moto perpetuo which finishes off a perfect symphony, coming after that amazing C major fourth movement with the 4-foot coupled flutes down to the pedal solo, and it correctly timed that C major chord. Just is a crescendo, isn't there? Sometimes I add more stops than Vidor says, but you can get a sort of sizzling string sound coming out, and then da 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 da. something like that.
To modify my outlook on it, I think. Yeah.
And of course, the first movement of that symphony is total genius.
It's wonderful.
Third symphony, first movement. Do you know that? That's in E minor.
No, I play the big stupid march that's in.
It's not stupid. It's one of the best pieces because yes, but it's naive and optimistic. It's a wonderful movement.
I say stupid in the nicest possible way. I think.
But and then the last movement, I think he wrote. Didn't he replace the original last movement with something he wrote much later, around the time of the 7th or 8th symphony?
I think depending on what edition you've got, they're all different.
Yes,
Exactly.
Is it Gerald Near? There's a great Red Book edition from the Canadian. I may have got the composer wrong, but play from those, not from the French things, which they're Durand, whatever it is, but they're littered with mistakes and there's no commentary in there.
So it turns out God never really liked organ music that much, and he sends every organist down below. I don't mean Australia. What plays on a loop in Martin Baker's Hell?
Well, we need to finish off on Vidor because we haven't yet got round to the 9th and the 10th symphonies.
Oh, go on then. Yeah, all right.
Because unlike Vierne, who is the answer to your question, by the way, that I would have... I mean, obviously, you're asking me to be very black and white about a complicated subject here, and... this kind of swashbuckling, suave Vidor at the beginning of his career. But then, and this is presumably very much influenced by the movement from Salem, where Gregorian chant was in resurgence. So his last two symphonies, the 9th and 10th, are based on the Gregorian chant for Christmas and Easter, respectively. Yeah. And of course, the Poenatus it fits quite well into C major. So Vidor is having to write tonally, but around chant, and it completely changes his language. And particularly in that last movement, one feels kind of transported to a different space. And but it's wonderful to see him rather than in going straight to a sort of Duruflé style or a kind of chant. It's still Vidor, but trying to incorporate a new musical idea. Then, of course, he goes even further with the Symphonie Romane, which has to be his masterpiece, with the Ache Diez, which is mode 2? I'm trying to remember now. Was it mode... Anyway.
Should I record a bit that just says, yes, it's mode 2, and then I'll record another bit that says, no, it's not, it's mode 8.
Yeah. So it looks, I think it's the printer key signature D major. I actually haven't played this for years, but it feels very modal, even more modal than the Ninth Symphony. So there you've got this composer who, on the surface, is flashy and wrote the toccata from the Fifth Symphony, but towards the end of his compositions is moving a very different and into a liturgical stroke spiritual direction. So Vienne, by comparison.
I've got a bit more to say about this one because I love Vienne.
Okay.
I spent the whole of 2019 learning the pièce de fantaisie, which I think are great, and I was going to put on loads of concerts in 2020, and then that thing happened that made everyone a bit more stay-at-homey. I do sort of get the criticisms levelled at Vienne. You know, it's sort of overwritten in places, and the chromaticism can be a bit sort of torturous at times. And there's a bit in
put it mildly.
Well, there's a bit in Requiem Aeternam where he sort of composes himself into a harmonic corner where he's basically in G major, but every note in a bar has a double flat on it. And you just think like, oh, come on, just write it in G major. Yeah. Is that kind of where you're coming from on this kind of thing? Yeah,
well, this actually, in the mid-90s, I played all of his symphonies in 6 weeks. And I wanted it. It was when I was at Westminster Abbey. I don't think I did it I didn't have enough time. I played most of them in bits before, but I didn't have the brain capacity really to pull it together successfully. But I did. I did it.
I seem to remember Jeremy Filsell played the whole lot in one day.
He may well have done it. It's the sort of thing Jeremy could do. But also Simon, who was at Southall and is now
Simon Hogan.
Hogan, yes. Yeah. He didn't he do them all in one afternoon in Southall before he left? Yes. Yeah, amazing. But I just find them dark, depressing. There are moments of light, but you know that they're transient. And
he did have a bit of a hard life, to be fair. I mean,
He did, but and that's. I mean, a lot of us might have hard lives in different ways. You don't have to make all of your music dark as a result. Music can be a form of escape from reality. But and it's often said, well, something like the Second Symphony, it's kind of cyclic, and what the fourth is, I think it's definitely the fifth is, isn't it? And you've got this kind of studied kind of Wagnerianism, haven't you, in the fifth? But even his final movements, with the exception of the end of the First Symphony, which is the most like Vidor actually as a symphony, he's very much kind of saying, I can follow this, master.
I went down the aisle to that, actually.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. See, that's basically the Marseillaise, isn't it? And there's no darkness in that. So it's a really good ending. I think I often, again, play rather too fast.
The finale to Symphony 6 is one of my favourite pieces ever. I think when it's good, it's really good.
Yes.
It's so exciting.
By which time he was visiting America, wasn't he? And he was writing for American organs. So you've got all these octave and sub-octave couplers coming through. And I think that as a piece would be quite difficult to play on a bog-standard Cave Cole, wouldn't it? It's so... there's so many notes going on, and Cave Cole's, it takes a reed some time to speak, doesn't it? So you have to play into the sound, you have to wait the keys. Yeah, I mean, it's fun, the finale, and it does, again, very nicely sum up the symphony itself. Not as much as the finale of the fifth. It does also kind of lapse into kind of angry tonalities at times. I think the best bit about it is the first one or two bars, the da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. It's basically a modulation, isn't it, to get you from the previous movement.
Totally.
Yes, in rather a fun way.
I love it.
So, again, playing that as a voluntary after a service, maybe one shouldn't play the first two bars. One should just go, ya-da-dum, da-da-da-da. You could argue that they're only there as a transition from what was there before.
Yeah. I don't know, I think there's something inherent in the humour of that then pervades the rest of the piece.
Yeah. But it brings in, this thing of how people play little movements from symphonies, and I think that's normal as a voluntary. Though I never found that Vienne Five's Last Week worked as voluntary. It's got that nice sort of daisy tune at the beginning, but then it feels like 10 minutes of angst.
It is 10 minutes long, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's far too long. Yeah,
and the ending is wonderful, but I just find that the pain one has to go through to get there. I mean, I'd rather listen to a good Brahms, any Brahms symphony, or some Strauss or something like that. There's a lot of pressure on organists to do town hall recital programs, isn't there? So if you offered an all-Bach program, people would go, "What? No way!" Unless it's a very specific organ in a particular festival. But if you're going to a regular venue, they don't want to hear Bach. Yeah. They want to hear the swell box opening and closing, and the movement from this, another movement from that. And you can do that a bit more successfully with Vidor, because the symphonies, although they do have an overall shape, it's easy to extract movements. So you could probably play, apart from the fourth movement, you can probably play any movement of the Fifth Symphony as a solo piece. But you kind of need the whole symphony a lot of the time to make sense of it. And I find the third particularly dark. I know he just found that. Was he staying with Dupré at the time and realised his wife was two-timing him or something?
That's right, yeah. There's all sorts of things happening. Yeah.
But I've heard that first movement, da-da-da-dum, played as voluntary after Mass. And this is basically, I've put some words to it, they're probably too rude to say, but about being so depressed and upset. Da, 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 da.
Right, well, there we go. On that note, I think you've convinced me on Vidor, and maybe I'll play a little bit less Vienne. Okay, right, do you fancy a quiz?
Okay.
Right.
Well, I've no idea what's coming. So.
Okay, so, well, if you're listening at home, you can play along, although due to the nature of the medium of podcasting, I won't be able to hear your answers, so I'll only be taking Martin's answers.
So, can I ask, before you start the questions, are there right and wrong answers, or is it just asking me what I think about things?
It's multiple choice. I wouldn't leave it in the lurch. So, yeah, don't worry.
Is there a score at the end of it?
I mean, if you want one, yeah.
Okay,
no,
gosh.
This
could be very embarrassing.
Yeah.
I've got a series of 5 questions, all multiple choice. They're all based on improvising.
Oh, right.
Question 1. Pierre Cochereau was organist of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris,
and is known as being one of the world's great organ improvisers.
Mm-hmm.
The first time he played an organ was when he was 13, a small clavicole instrument in the south of France, and the date was the 2nd of June 1937. But coincidentally, this was also the date that what happened at Notre Dame. A dead chicken was discovered in one of the big 16-foot pedal pipes. B, Louis Vienne died at the console giving his 1,750th organ recital. Or C, there was a clergy strike and no priests turned up for mass.
Well, it could have been all three, couldn't it? But I do know that B is correct, even if the others are also correct.
It was an easy one. Yeah.
But so how do you know that's the day that Pierre Cochereau first played the organ? I did
lots of research on a website called Wikipedia that told me that Cochereau was I think it was either sickly or errant child, so he was sent off to the south of France by his dad. And he discovered this church where he was practicing the piano and he wanted to play the organ, and the first time he got the keys to the organ was on that date. So there's something quite amazing, poetic about the torch being passed from one Notre Dame organist to the other.
I would love to have met Cochereau. I did hear him play once.
Really?
I was too young to know it was him.
Where was that?
In Notre Dame. I was taken into mass sometime in the 1970s by my parents, who didn't want to go in. Mm-hmm. They thought I was a religious snob and shouldn't go into kind of cathedrals. I should have been, down by the seaside or something. But there was just incredible music at mass, and I was too young to know what I was listening to. But it was great.
Question 2. You recently gave the opening organ recital of the new Euler organ in Magdalen College, Oxford.
Mm-hmm. And
one of the pieces you played was Saga No. 6 by Jean Guillou.
Yes.
Himself a fine improviser, and I know a big inspiration for you.
Yes.
Guillou himself, he performed this piece in his church, Saint Eustache, in a concert in 2010. But what was going on while he played it? A. Several interpretive dancers were bungeeing up and down the stone pillars in blue leotards.
That's quite possible.
B. The organ console was placed on a big lazy Susan and revolved slowly. Or C. A dog with papier-mâché wings was carried around a model of the sun to represent Icarus.
Well, I suppose it's either B or C, isn't it? But I have no idea which. They both seem rather unlikely. I bet I'll go for the lazy Susan.
Oh, thanks. That's a real credit to my imagination. I came up with that one. Yeah, that's not true.
Oh.
No, it's there's a video on YouTube of this, actually.
Okay.
It's actually A. So there's...
No.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure the occasion was. It must have been like a festival or something, but it's really strange seeing these sort of Smurf-like figures sort of bungeeing up and down the walls of the church while...
Good heavens.
Guillou, with his sort of radical eyebrows, is just playing all this really dissonant music on there.
Yes. Well, I played that last night, and I was... it's a piece that I've actually never learnt. Yeah, because you mentioned YouTube. The reason I've not learnt it is that Guillou improvised it originally, and then he wrote it out, and it was published, I think, a year later in 1970 as the 6th of 6 sagas, and he's recorded it, and lots of people have recorded it, and I've listened to a lot of those recordings. They're available on things like Apple Music and YouTube even, and they all sound, great, but it sounds like somebody's playing a piece of music, even Guillou. You can find, if you research on YouTube, his original improvisation, which was on the organ that he had installed. He had 2 new organs installed in Saint Eustache, didn't he? And this was the one that he had put in the 60s. And it's his original improvisation. It's not a very nice instrument. It sounds quite sort of harsh and German on the recording that I've heard. Maybe it was different in the building. And it's a spectacular improvisation. And all those octaves, most of them are split. And sometimes in his printed, written out version, he writes the dissonances in, but a lot of the time he doesn't. And I thought, well, I could spend a lot of time learning this piece and play Saga 6 by Guillou, or I could go back to the original kind of spirits that Guillou had and imagine Icarus plummeting to the ground with, it's almost as if Guillou is Icarus when he plays this improvisation. And I was privileged to see him play and improvise on many occasions in the sort of 15 years before he died. And there was always a kind of a look of panic on his face with his eyebrows going up. And the results were electric, but it was almost as if he wasn't in control at times. And so I had the music in front of me, so I had that sort of rough idea of how the improvisation went.
But no dancers in leotards.
Okay. Well, maybe if the fee had been higher, I'd have done that myself.
Yeah. Right, question 3. Which of the following scripted pieces did not start off life as an improvisation? A. The Symphonie Passion. Is that how you say it? Passion? By Dupré.
Mm-hmm.
B. The Fugue in G minor 542 by Bach. Or Reger BACH.
Well, I know that the Symphonie Passion was improvised in Wanamaker.
Correct.
I don't know if Bach improvised BWV 542. It's quite possible that he did. Maybe there's a source that you have access to that I don't. And what was the third piece?
It was Reger BACH.
BACH. I don't have access to that information, so it's going to have to be a guess. May I ask, is yours a guess or is it fact?
It's a fact as in as much as it's pulled from Wikipedia once more.
So it's a fact in quotation marks. Yeah. I'm going to have to go with the Reger because I'm not aware of any source of Bach.
Yeah, right. I think I'm right in saying Bach actually improvised that fugue for a job. So the answer is actually the Reger BACH, which was written rather than improvised. The thought of improvising a fugue terrifies me. Do you ever do fugal?
Oh, all the time. No, of course I don't. That's a different trend in improvisation, and it's a very highly skilled. I have to say, I don't know whether I could do it. Before I did the St Albans competition, I trained myself to do sort of contrapuntal stuff because I thought it would be useful for the competition. But basically, the bottom line for me is it doesn't interest me that much because people have written that stuff already. If you want some good counterpoint, just get out all the music that's already there. I prefer to feel improvisation is a kind of a release potentially into the unknown rather than just being pastiche.
Someone who also had that philosophy. Question 4. Charles Tournemire is mostly known for L'Orgue Mystique, a massive collection of plain song-inspired versettes totaling 51 suites, which correspond to the annual liturgical calendar. But roughly how many bits of chant does he reference over the course of the whole work? Is it A, 300, B, 450, or C, 900?
So we've got, somewhere or another, I've got a document that lists them all. So, but I'm going to have to work this out mathematically. There are 51 suites. Each one has, all but one has 5 movements. Correct. One has, yes. 50 times 5 is 250. But we know there's more than, so your options were 300?
300, 450, or 900.
I'm pretty sure it can't be 900. 450 seems like there would be quite a lot of stuff that some of the movements I'm pretty sure are limited just to one piece of chant, but I could be wrong. So I'm going to guess that it's the A, 300.
It is 300.
Okay,
yeah,
right.
What a hack. Yeah. It's all good stuff. It needs the right building, doesn't it? But it's effective music, I think.
I mean, Tournemire could have been my heaven organist. I think like Bach, he's already there.
Right, final question. Number 5. After a particularly dissonant improvisation you gave on your YouTube channel a few years ago, several armchair critics had their say about your playing in various comments and underground internet forums.
Really?
Which one of these was said about your improv? A. Sounds like circus music. B. Suitable for a pinball tournament. Or C. Absolute dreck.
I think it's probably the latter, isn't it? It's C.
It's actually all 3. And the question is not designed to make you feel bad, but rather just to make the point that you're never going to please everyone, are you?
I think, did I put that out on I have a very little used YouTube channel, and I saw, comments coming through, and I thought, well, they're entitled to their views.
I should say there's far more positive comments saying how amazingly complex and brilliant your playing is, but you've got to have a thick skin, haven't you, to sort of put your
absolutely, and then I would rather somebody didn't like it than said, "Oh, it just sounds like it's something that I've heard several times before."
Great, thank you. Well, you scored. I can't remember, but you did pretty well. So, Martin, we've already learned that you earn an honest crust flogging ejector seats. So I'm going to out you as a plane enthusiast.
Yeah.
Avid user of simulators.
Yes.
There are quite a number of organists who are also train enthusiasts, and I sort of get that, I suppose, but what's the appeal of a plane simulator?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I had a brief spell as a train spotter when I was in my early teens. But then in my early 20s, I just discovered flight simulation software, and I was never interested in computer games, kind of like shoot 'em ups or whatever you call, where, kind of guns or weapons, and you're probably more au fait with that than I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But I love the complexity of aviation, I suppose. And I've been particularly interested in the Boeing 747. I've got some very high-level software for that. A few years ago, I decided to network a few computers together and had 7 touch screens, I think, so I could have sit inside a cockpit and push the buttons that actually, where they actually are, and with an overhead panel. And there's there's some cheap and not very good software that you can use for the visuals outside. That's normal, it's called prepared P3D or Microsoft Flight Simulator. Yeah. That is a very low-end program. So the one I'm using is for the Boeing 747. It's as real as you can get without getting in an actual British Airways simulator itself.
I think I'd like to have a go. I mean, I've got a PlayStation at home, but I haven't got the VR thing, the goggles and everything. Yeah. Do you have that? Or I think I'll be quite sick.
No, it's all 2D panels, but placed around the room. So I mean, you don't need much space for a cockpit. They're actually quite small in real life. Yeah. But I think the attraction of it's a bit like playing the organ. There's the geeky technical stuff which keeps a bit of my brain occupied. But very much like playing the organ, you've got to create a piece of music and get from A to B and make beautiful shapes. And isn't that exactly what a plane does when it takes off? But the hardest bit of flying is about the sort of 30 minutes before takeoff. And so it's a bit like doing a practice for a recital. Yeah. And then once you actually have the flight, you've got this feeling of the security of having been through all of the correct procedures and set up the plane correctly. And you can do things which may appeal to some people, but there are people who fly online in real life, and there are air traffic controllers. So I've learnt the aviation language, for air traffic control, and you can talk to it's not to a computer but to a real person over the internet and see the other planes around you. Amazing. Yeah, it's kind of fun.
I wonder if that's the evolution of Hauptwerk as well. Having screens around you so you feel like you're in Notre Dame or Freiburg, and maybe a VR headset in the end, so you can actually feel like you're really there as well as hearing the proper sounds.
Yes, well, Richard McVeigh has gone a long way to achieving that, and there's another place near Bochum, or in Bochum, in the Ruhr district of Germany, where somebody's got a very advanced Hauptwerk. But I have no loyalty to Hauptwerk or nobody's paying me to say this is what I'm trying to say, but there's a new program called Svelink with a Q at the end, and it's only got a few organs, and I use that more than Hauptwerk. It uses the organs load in a second, only need 8 or 16 gigabytes of RAM, and the organs they've got are mostly North German, Dutch organs. I love practicing on those sounds. And so I think Hauptwerk is it's bloated software, isn't it? It was developed in the early 2000s, and they've added and added and added, but it's so unwieldy. And
I'm still yet to get into it, to be honest.
Okay.
I mean, it's I need to do a bit more research.
But it's a great vehicle for education, isn't it? So you
can
get a student and say, here's what ventals do, and here's how a North German organ sounds, for instance, versus a French carriole.
And with that, I suppose we ought to wrap up and hit the eject button on this podcast. Martin, thank you for chatting.
Pleasure.
It's been great to talk. Anything you want to plug?
No, I don't do that kind of thing. Sorry.
Okay, cool. Right.
In which case, could we just end with you saying something hyperbolic about how good the Chiff Chat podcast is?
Yeah, well, I've not heard it yet, and I hope I haven't ruined it for you, Ben. But the YouTube thing you've got going on Chiff Chat, I love. It's fantastic. And I never realised that you and J.S. Bach looked so similar. His mouth.
It is uncanny, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I thought there was even maybe a little northern twang to Bach's accent. Was there?
No, I think you're hearing things.
Okay. Brilliant. It's so good that you're doing this. It's a lot of fun, and I think it's great to open up the organ world to as many people as possible in fun ways.
Great. Well, doing that. There you go. You heard it here first. Chiff Chat is okay.
Oh, bravo. What a podcast that was. Some of our best work yet, don't you think? Thanks to my special guest Martin Baker for giving up his time and his patience. I'm seeing him later this week, actually, so I can offer my condolences in person for this podcast tanking his career. Now, I happen to know that Martin uses a tablet to read his scores from, rather than the tried and true paper copies of yesteryear. And this is a move I'm considering making myself. At the moment, for recitals, I still use paper copies, or if I want to avoid page turns, I'll paste a load of pages up on a big A3 sketchpad, which is both time-consuming to do and a pain to carry around, especially when you're playing different pieces in different sketchpads. I really do see the appeal of having all your music on one device, and the benefits of being able to mark in registrations for different instruments and turn the pages with a wink of your eye. I can't lie, it would be incredibly convenient. I'm just a little hesitant to jump on the iPad bandwagon though. I don't know. Lots of people have said, oh, you'll never look back, it'll change your life. But what if it crashes before a concert, runs out of battery, or you drop it down the pedal board and the screen cracks? Or what if a polar bear eats it? I suppose you could argue all these problems could be resolved by just planning ahead, not being a clumsy oaf, and not hanging around the Arctic tundra. But I don't know, I'd be interested to hear from you and your experiences. Do send me an email on podcast@chiffchat.com. Last week, I asked you to write in with the weirdest organ pieces you've come across. I mentioned a wacky piece by Maurizio Cargill, which had a title made up of 8 R's in a row. Terry, who's written in before, I think, hi Terry, has suggested the Variations on America, or God Save the King, by Charles Ives, which has a bit of bitonality in it. That is to say, the right hand plays in F major, and the left hand and pedals play in D flat major. Terry says, as I understand it, this was to simulate the tonality clashes experienced when listening to marching bands passing on the street during the annual Independence Day celebrations. What a cool idea. I mean, practically, it's really difficult to do, playing in 2 different keys. It requires so much brain juice to keep multiple plates spinning at once. It's really like patting your head and rubbing your tummy at the same time. Graham has also written in, linking to a whole website devoted to weird and wonderful organ oddities. I'm very grateful you've sent that my way, Graham, but unfortunately, and probably predictably, I've used that exact website to formulate most of my quiz questions, so forgive me, but I'm not going to give the game away. Great minds think alike, though. And with that, I think we're out of time. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to write in with any thoughts, feelings, hopes and dreams to podcast@chiffchat.com. And if you felt like you wanted to drop any pennies into my digital piggy bank, then please do go to my tip jar page. Link is in the description. Right, one more email. Dear Mr. Blore, this is from Barclays Bank again, by the way. Yeah, we're still milking this joke dry. Dear Mr. Blore, just because you forgot to read out an email from us on last week's podcast doesn't mean we've forgotten your debt. You must understand that the organ pipe you sent us cannot be used as collateral payment, although we have passed it on to our bailiff to use as he sees fit when he visits your home shortly to reclaim your Pringles collection. Oh, what? I didn't know they were after them. Right, I better get this sorted now. This is serious. I'll see you next week, everyone, for another special guest on Chiff Chat. Bye.